What if escaping the life everyone envied meant running straight into the arms of the one man you were never meant to meet? Madison Pierce slipped away from her lavish engagement party under a sky full of stars, still wearing the designer gown her mother had chosen and the ring she never wanted. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. When a passing storm forced her to seek shelter, she ended up at a secluded estate on the edge of town, and face to face with Ethan Cross, the reclusive man whose life had been quietly ruined by her father's ambition. He should have turned her away, but he didn't, and as the night deepened, so did the questions neither of them were ready to answer. If powerful stories of love, loss, and redemption move you, hit that like button. It helps more people discover love stories worth telling. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you. And be sure to subscribe and ring that bell, because every story I share is chosen to make you feel something real. The rain hammered down like bullets from heaven. Madison Pierce sat frozen in her rental car, gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. The elegant music from the engagement party still echoed in her mind, mixed with her father's harsh words. "You will marry Robert." This isn't a discussion, Madison. It's a command. She had fled right in the middle of the grand engagement party at the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago. Crystal chandeliers had sparkled overhead while the city's elite clinked champagne glasses in celebration. Madison, dressed in a stunning white gown that cost more than most people's homes, had slipped out the back door without a single glance back. Now, driving through the winding roads of Colorado, she felt completely lost. The GPS had died an hour ago, leaving her with nothing but static and broken dreams. The rain made everything look like a watercolor painting left in the storm. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. The heir to the Pierce financial empire, raised to be perfect in every way, was now running like a criminal from her own life. She thought about Robert, her father's chosen groom. He wasn't evil, just empty. His smile was like a business handshake, polite, proper, and completely hollow. Madison had tried to love him. She had tried to believe this marriage would bring happiness. But every time she looked into Robert's eyes, all she saw was a mirror reflecting her own trapped soul. She was a bird in a golden cage, and every dream was slowly dying. Through the rain, she spotted a faint light in the distance. Her heart raced as she saw tall iron gates leading to a gravel driveway. She remembered booking a small bed and breakfast online before her world fell apart. "This has to be it," she whispered to herself, though doubt crept in like the cold. She drove through the gates, tires crunching on wet gravel. Before her stood a massive, dark mansion that looked like something from a ghost story. The windows were black, the stone walls covered in ivy. This didn't look like a cozy inn. It looked forgotten by time itself. Madison turned off the engine. The storm roared outside, making her hesitate. She stared up at the towering structure, but she had no choice. Her designer dress was soaked, her heels were torture, and the cold was seeping into her bones. She needed shelter, at least for tonight. She stepped out into the rain, the wind hitting her face like punishment. Madison ran to the front door and knocked hard. No answer. She knocked again, almost pounding, but only the storm replied. "Is anyone here?" she called out. She tried the heavy wooden door, and to her surprise, it opened with a long, haunting groan. Inside was a wide, dim hallway that smelled of old wood and melted candles. Madison stepped in, her wet shoes leaving tracks on the marble floor. "Hello?" Her voice echoed softly before being swallowed by the darkness. No reply. She walked deeper into the house, her heart pounding. A small fire crackled in the living room fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the antique paintings along the walls. She stopped in front of a portrait of a woman with sad eyes that seemed to look right through her soul. Madison shivered, but not from the cold. She felt like she had entered a place where she didn't belong. Just one night, she whispered to herself. I'll leave in the morning. She peeled off her soaked dress and curled up in an armchair by the fire. The flames offered warmth, but they couldn't touch the loneliness crushing her chest. She thought of her mother, who had died when Madison was young. Her mother had once said, "Freedom costs more than diamonds, Madison, but you have to be brave enough to pay the price." Madison had never understood those words until tonight, until she sat in this strange house, no longer the Pierce heiress, but simply a girl searching for herself. She closed her eyes, letting the fire's warmth wrap around her. But then she heard footsteps, slow, heavy, echoing from the staircase. Madison's eyes flew open, her body frozen with fear. Out of the shadows stepped a tall figure. His eyes were sharp and cold, locked onto hers like a predator studying its prey. "The Pierce heiress," came a low, ice-cold voice. "What are you doing in my house?" Madison felt her blood turn to ice. The man stood at the top of the stairs, his tall frame almost swallowed by the darkness. Only his piercing eyes caught the firelight. His voice was deep and cold, yet strangely magnetic. He knew who she was. How did he know? And more importantly, where was she? She jumped to her feet, her wet dress clinging to her skin, making her feel small and exposed. I'm sorry," she stammered, taking a step back. "I didn't mean to break in. I thought this was a bed and breakfast. I'll leave right away." But as she turned toward the door, the howling wind outside made her freeze. The rain had turned into a full-blown storm, screaming like it could tear the world apart. "Leave," the man echoed, stepping down one stair. The dim firelight revealed his angular face, messy black hair, and a faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes, deep, mysterious, full of secrets, that held her captive. "Where exactly do you think you're going in a storm like this? The roads are flooded, and there's a blizzard coming. You'll freeze to death before you reach the gates." Madison clenched her fists, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't need your help. I can take care of myself." But even she could hear the tremor in her words. She didn't know where she was, her phone was dead. The cold was seeping into her bones, and this man, frightening as he was, might be her only hope. He gave a cold smile. "Take care of yourself? A little princess like you, running from your palace, thinking you can survive out here?" He stepped down a few more stairs, now only a few feet away. "Sit down, Miss Pierce, before I change my mind and let you figure it out on your own." Her name in his mouth sounded like an accusation. Madison wanted to fight back, to scream that she wasn't the delicate doll he imagined. But she was exhausted, drained after hours of driving and the emotional weight of the party she'd fled. She sank back into the armchair, her eyes locked on him. "Who are you? And how do you know me?" He stopped, leaning casually against the banister as if deciding whether to answer. "Ethan Cross," he said simply. "This is my home. And as for knowing you, who in Chicago doesn't know the Pierce family? The media talks about you like you're the city's crown jewel." A flash of anger rose in her. "You don't know anything about me. Don't pretend you understand just because you read some gossip articles." But deep down, unease crept in. Ethan Cross. The name stirred something, a vague memory she couldn't quite place. Ethan raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by her fire. He walked over to the fireplace and threw in another log, making the flames roar higher. "Maybe I don't know you," he said, his tone slightly softer but still sharp. "But I know people like you, raised in silk. Then one day you decide to rebel, only to realize you can't live without the glow of that golden cage." His words cut deep. Madison wanted to scream, to tell him about the prison her father had built, about the dreams that were slowly dying behind her perfect smile. But instead, she bit her lip and looked away. "You have no right to judge me." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the wind rattling the windows. Ethan sat in the armchair across from hers, far enough to keep distance, but close enough that she could feel his presence. He studied her slowly, like reading a book he wasn't sure he wanted to finish. "Then tell me," he said at last, his voice low, "why are you here? A girl like you, in a dress worth thousands, ending up in a place like this? What are you running from?" Madison looked up and met his gaze. There was something in the way he asked. Not just curiosity, but genuine interest, like he actually wanted to know. She hesitated. Should she tell the truth or keep hiding? But maybe because she was tired, or maybe because she was lonely, she let her guard down. "I didn't want to marry the man my father chose," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't want to live a life that was already written for me. I just wanted to be myself, even if it's only for once." Ethan didn't respond right away. He looked at her with gentler eyes, as if seeing something he hadn't expected. "Freedom," he said quietly. "You think it's that easy? Just run away and you'll have it?" "No," Madison replied, her eyes burning with determination. "But at least I tried. That's better than spending my life living a lie." Another pause. Then Ethan gave a short laugh, dry, but not cruel. "You're braver than I thought, Miss Pierce," he said. He stood up, walking back toward the staircase. "Get some rest. There's a guest room upstairs. If the storm clears by morning, you can leave." Madison watched him go, her heart racing with a feeling she couldn't name. Who was he? Why did he live alone in this shadowy mansion? And why, despite his cold manner, did she feel an unexplainable connection, like fate had brought her here for a reason? She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shake the chill. But deep down, she knew that tonight, in this forgotten house, something had begun. 3 days passed, yet the snowstorm showed no signs of stopping. Ethan Cross's ancient mansion, with its freezing stone walls and endless corridors, had become Madison Pierce's entire world. She sat by the parlor window, watching snow bury the driveway that led to the gates. Her heart felt heavy. The freedom she had craved now seemed like a distant dream, trapped by the weather and by the presence of the mysterious man who owned this house. Ethan was more elusive than she'd imagined. He appeared at the most unexpected moments, when she was reading a dusty book in the study, or when she lingered too long before the hallway portrait of that sad-eyed woman. He rarely spoke, yet every word felt sharp, as if he could see straight through her. What unsettled Madison most was how much he already knew about her, beyond her name and the Pierce fortune. He even knew she'd once refused one of her father's major contracts to protect a small charity. "How do you know about that?" she'd asked, her voice trembling. Ethan had merely shrugged. "I have my ways." Today, with snow still falling hard, Madison decided to break the suffocating silence. She found Ethan in the kitchen, slicing vegetables with intense focus. The oil lamp above cast warm light across his angular features and that faint scar on his brow. Standing in the doorway, she hesitated, then spoke. "You live here alone, don't you? No staff, no phone, no internet. Don't you ever feel lonely?" The knife paused mid-stroke. He didn't turn, but she sensed tension in his shoulders. "Loneliness is a choice," he said, his voice low. "There are worse things than being alone." He resumed chopping as if her question were nothing more than a passing breeze. Madison stepped into the kitchen and sat at the old wooden table. "Like what?" she pressed softly but boldly. "Living in a house full of ghosts? Or hiding from the outside world?" This time, Ethan looked at her. His deep, unreadable eyes made her pulse flutter. "You speak as if you understand me," he replied with a faint, cold smile. "And what about you, Madison? Running from a marriage, from your entire world. What did you expect to find here? Freedom, or just another cage?" His words stabbed with surgical precision. Madison felt her cheeks warm, not from anger, but from the way he'd pierced her deepest fear. She lowered her gaze, fiddling with a spoon. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I just know I can't keep living the way I was. I don't want to be my father's puppet or anyone else's." Silence draped the room, broken only by the knife tapping the cutting board and the muffled whisper of snow against the windows. Then Ethan did something unexpected. He set the knife down, wiped his hands on a towel, and sat across from her. "When I was young," he began, his voice deep and distant, "I thought I could change everything. I had dreams, someone I loved, an entire future planned out. But life isn't a fairy tale. Sometimes you learn to live with what's left." Madison looked up, surprised by his openness. For the first time, she saw a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. "What happened?" she whispered. "To the one you loved?" Ethan's gaze held hers for a moment, weighing something. Then he stood and returned to the vegetables. "Dinner first," he said, his voice cooling again. "You'll need strength in this cold." They ate in near silence, but the tension had softened. Over steaming potato soup, Madison discovered Ethan was a better cook than she'd expected. When she praised the soup, he only shrugged, yet she caught a brief sparkle in his eyes, as if he wasn't used to compliments. Afterward, they settled by the fireplace. Madison hugged a wool blanket while Ethan held a book he never opened. She tried again. "You never answered my question about the woman you loved." Ethan stared into the flames for a long time before speaking. "She was an artist," he murmured, grief threading through his tone. "She lived for music, for beauty. But the world isn't kind to spirits like hers. I couldn't protect her." His hand tightened around the book. "That's all you need to know." A stab of pain pulsed in Madison's chest, partly for his story, partly because she realized he too carried deep wounds. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. "But you can't live in the past forever. Not everyone will leave you." He turned toward her, his eyes cutting yet vulnerable. "Easy words," he replied, not with sarcasm but quiet resignation. "And you? Can you truly leave everything behind, family, status, money, for a life where no one knows your name?" She gave a sad smile. "I'm trying, but I'm afraid I'm not strong enough." Her confession hung between them. Ethan studied her so long her heartbeat quickened. In his gaze, she sensed no pity, only understanding. A spark leapt between them then. Not the hearth's glow, but something deeper, more dangerous. When Ethan rose and said it was late, that she should get some sleep, Madison knew he was keeping his distance. Yet she also knew that whether he admitted it or not, he was drawn to her. Not to the Pierce heiress, but to the real woman beneath, scarred and aching for freedom. That night, she drifted to sleep with his eyes imprinted on her mind, and with a dawning realization that even if the storm cleared, she might not be ready to leave this place so soon. On the 5th day inside Ethan Cross's mansion, time seemed to stop for Madison. The blizzard still raged outside the windows, burying every path. But inside her, another storm was stirring, a storm of emotions that surged whenever Ethan was near. He kept his distance, yet their brief conversations and fleeting glances had begun to melt the icy walls they both had built. That morning, Ethan had disappeared somewhere within the vast estate, leaving Madison alone in the grand living room. She sat near the fireplace, flipping through pages of an old novel, but her mind wasn't on the book. She was thinking of him, of the way he had looked at her last night when she confessed her fears. There had been something in his eyes, not just understanding, but a pain he tried to hide. Madison wanted to know more, not out of curiosity, but because she felt a strange connection, as if fate had tied them together. She stood and wandered through the cold corridors. This mansion, with its ancient paintings and dust-covered furniture, felt like a museum of forgotten memories. She paused in front of a pair of oak doors she hadn't noticed before. A faint sliver of light escaped from beneath them, along with the scent of old wood and candle wax. Intrigued, Madison pushed them open. Inside was a large room with towering windows draped in deep crimson velvet. Faint daylight filtered through, illuminating a grand piano in the center of the room. Its glossy surface was coated in a thin layer of dust, as if no one had touched it in years. Madison's heart began to race. She had studied piano since childhood, but stopped after her mother passed away. Music had always been an escape for her, but also a painful reminder of loss. She stepped closer, letting her fingers brush over the yellowed ivory keys. A familiar feeling rose within her, as if she were reconnecting with a part of herself long buried. She sat down, drew a deep breath, and began to play. Clair de Lune by Debussy filled the room, its soft, moonlit notes weaving a spell that erased the storm. The weight of the Pierce name, everything. Madison closed her eyes and let the melody carry her away. She didn't realize Ethan was standing in the doorway. When the music ended, she opened her eyes and gasped. He was there, still and silent, his dark eyes haunted like a man trapped in a nightmare. His usually unreadable face was now raw with something she couldn't quite name. "Where did you get the right to play that piano?" he asked, his voice low and raspy, like it had been pulled from the depths of memory. Madison stood up, her heart pounding. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I just saw it, and..." She trailed off, realizing he wasn't truly angry. He was trembling, barely, but unmistakably, and his eyes weren't on her. They were on the piano, like it was a ghost come to life. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on the piano lid so gently, as if he were touching a wound. "She used to play that piece," he murmured, barely audible. "Every night she'd sit here, and just listening to her was enough to make me forget everything." A chill passed down Madison's spine. She asked softly, already guessing he meant the woman he had mentioned. Ethan turned away, as if unwilling to let her see his expression. "Elena," he said. The name sliced through the air like a blade. She was a pianist. She lived for music, for beauty. But the world never understood her. And then one day, she vanished. No note, no trace. Madison didn't know what to say. She could feel his pain in every word, like he was tearing open his chest just to speak. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know the piano meant so much to you." Ethan gave a short, dry laugh. "It's not your fault. I never thought I'd hear that piece again. Not in this room. Not after all these years." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, Madison saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "You play beautifully, Madison. As if you understand it. As if you understand what it carries." His praise made her cheeks flush, but she didn't let herself be swept away. "What happened to Elena?" she asked gently but firmly. "You said she disappeared. Is that why you live like this? As if you're hiding." Ethan's hands clenched, his gaze turning distant. "I'm not hiding," he said, but the conviction in his voice had faded. "I just don't want history to repeat itself. Elena wasn't just someone I loved. She was the reason I believed the world could still be beautiful. When she vanished, that belief vanished too." Madison stepped closer, not touching him, but close enough for him to feel her presence. "You can't keep living with ghosts, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I know the past can be heavy. I'm running from mine too. But if you don't let it go, it'll drag you under." Ethan looked at her for so long she thought her heart might stop. "You speak like you know how to let go," he said quietly. "But look at you, Madison. You fled Chicago, fled your father, but you're still carrying that cage in your mind." His words hit hard. He was right, and that hurt. But before she could respond, Ethan turned and walked out of the room. "Don't play that piano again," he said without looking back. "Not because I don't want you to, but because I don't know if I can bear it." Madison stood alone in the fading light, snow still falling beyond the frosted glass. She looked at the piano and, for the first time, realized this mansion wasn't just her shelter. It was a tomb of memories, a place where Ethan had buried his heart. And she, though she didn't want to admit it, was being drawn deeper into his story, deeper than she had ever imagined. On the 7th night inside Ethan Cross's mansion, Madison couldn't sleep. She lay on the couch in the guest room, firelight dancing across the ceiling, but her mind was trapped in the piano room. In Ethan's raspy voice as he spoke of Elena, she saw him in every corner of this house. In the worn books, the portrait of the woman, the dust-covered piano. And what scared her most was that she wasn't just curious about him anymore. She was drawn to him, deeply and helplessly. She got up, wrapped a wool blanket around her shoulders, and stepped into the hallway. The blizzard had quieted, leaving behind only the occasional whisper of wind slipping through the window panes. She heard a faint sound from the living room where the fire still crackled. Ethan sat there in the armchair, a glass of red wine in his hand. The firelight highlighted the sharp lines of his face and the depth in his eyes. In front of him sat a bottle and another glass, as if he'd known she would come. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, without looking up. Madison hesitated, then sat in the chair across from him. "You're not sleeping either," she replied, trying to sound steady despite her racing heart. She eyed the glass on the table. "Is that for me?" Ethan gave a rare smile, not mocking, but mysterious. "If you want it." He slid the glass toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. "But be careful. It's stronger than it looks." She took the glass and sipped. The wine was rich and bold, burning its way down her throat. "Is this what you always do?" she asked softly. "Sit alone, drink wine, and think about the past?" Ethan stared into the fire, silent for a while before answering. "Not always, but some nights, the past refuses to let me be." He took another sip, then looked at her. "What about you? What do you think about lying in that unfamiliar room?" Madison gripped her glass tighter, her eyes on the flames. She wanted to lie, to keep her distance, but the wine, or maybe just his presence, made her let go. "I think about my mother," she whispered. "She died when I was 10. She was the only one who ever really understood me. After that, my father turned me into something else, a perfect doll for display, for contracts, for marrying a man I don't love." Ethan listened without interruption. When she fell silent, he spoke, his voice deep and low. "You're more like your mother than you think. Elena, she was like that too. She never let anyone decide her fate." Madison looked up, startled. "You knew my mother?" she asked, her voice shaking. He shook his head, but something unreadable passed through his eyes. "No, but I know people like you. People with hearts too big for the world to hold without crushing them." His words struck something deep inside her. Madison took another sip, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice bolder now. "What kind of heart do you have, Ethan? A broken one, or one that's already dead?" He let out a dry chuckle, rough but not cruel. "You're braver than I thought, Madison Pierce." He leaned forward and set his glass on the table. "You want to know about my heart? It still beats, but it's learned not to feel. That's the only way it knows how to survive." Madison held his gaze, her voice trembling with emotion. "That's not living," she said. "That's existing. And I don't want that. Not for me, and not for you." The space between them thickened. Ethan looked at her so long, so intensely, she felt like she might dissolve beneath his gaze. Then, as if something pulled him beyond his control, he reached for her hand. His touch was warm, strong, yet so gentle it was barely there. Madison felt her breath catch, her pulse stuttering. "Ethan," she whispered, not even knowing what she meant to say. He didn't let her finish. He pulled her toward him, and before she could react, his lips met hers. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was fierce, hungry, as if they'd both held back too long. Madison felt the world vanish. Only his warmth remained, the taste of wine on his lips, the thunder of her own heartbeat. She responded, her hands finding his shoulders, clinging to him like she was afraid he'd disappear. The kiss deepened, pulling them into a whirlwind of emotion. But then, like lightning, reality struck. Madison broke away, breathless, panic in her eyes. "No," she gasped, her voice shaking. "We can't. I can't." Ethan didn't move to stop her. His eyes still burned, but he let her go. "What are you afraid of?" he asked, his voice rough. "Me or yourself?" Madison stood abruptly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders to the floor. Her heart felt torn in two. That kiss, it was more real than anything she'd ever experienced. And yet, it was dangerous. She didn't know who Ethan really was, didn't know his past. And worse, she didn't know if she was strong enough to face what she felt. "I have to go," she said, barely more than a whisper. "The storm has passed. I can't stay here anymore." Ethan said nothing. He just looked at her, his expression a mix of pain and resolve. "If you want to go, I won't stop you," he said quietly. "But you know, Madison, running never solves anything." She turned and ran down the hall, slamming the bedroom door behind her. She collapsed onto the bed, covering her face, trying to hold back the tears. His kiss still burned on her lips, sweet and devastating. She knew he was right. She wasn't just running from her father or from Robert. She was running from herself. She looked toward the window where the first light of dawn broke through the snow. The road was clear. She could leave. But as she packed the few belongings she had, her heart felt unbearably heavy. Leaving meant leaving Ethan. Leaving something she hadn't yet understood, but had already made her feel more alive than ever. Standing at the door, hand on the knob, she asked herself, "Do I really want to go, or am I just trying to convince myself I should?" After last night's kiss, Madison couldn't face Ethan. She avoided him, wandering through the mansion's cold hallways, trying to extinguish the fire still smoldering inside her. The snowstorm had passed, the road to the gates was now clear, but she remained, not because of the weather, but because part of her couldn't bring herself to leave him. She wasn't ready to walk away from the mystery this house held, from the mystery that Ethan himself was. That morning, while Ethan was out checking the roads, Madison found her way to the study, a room she hadn't explored before. The small space was lined with oak-paneled walls, filled with shelves of old books and the faint scent of aging paper. Soft light from the window fell across a wooden desk, where a carved wooden box lay quietly. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a faded red ribbon. The envelopes were wrinkled, the handwriting strong yet elegant. Her breath caught when she saw the signature at the bottom of one letter. E.C. Ethan Cross. His name cut through her thoughts like a blade. With trembling hands, she opened the first letter. It was dated 10 years ago, addressed to her father, William Pierce. The content was brief but icy. "William, I've held up my end of the deal. If you go back on your word, there won't be a second time." Madison felt the blood drain from her face. She read on, each letter a piece of a story she had never known. Ethan and her father had once been business partners, investing in a massive financial venture. A younger Ethan had poured everything he had into the deal, trusting her father's word. Then came the final letter. The handwriting was shakier, the words like a dagger. "William, you betrayed me. You took everything, my money, my name, my future. I swear no Pierce will ever set foot in my house again." Madison collapsed into the chair, clutching the letters as if they were explosives. Ethan didn't just know her father. He had been destroyed by him. This mansion, his reclusive life, all of it was fallout from that betrayal. But what hurt the most was the kiss. He had kissed her knowing she was the daughter of the man who ruined him. What did it mean? Revenge? Or a moment of weakness? She heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Ethan entered, his coat still dusted with snow. His eyes darkened as they landed on the letters in her hands. "You had no right to go through that," he said, his voice like ice. But she caught something else in his expression, a flicker of panic. "No right." Madison stood, her voice shaking with hurt and fury. "You knew who I was from the beginning, didn't you? The daughter of William Pierce, the man who took everything from you. So why did you let me stay? Why did you?" Her voice caught. "Why did you kiss me?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. "You want the truth?" he asked, stepping forward, forcing her to take a step back. "I let you stay because I wanted to see William Pierce's daughter fall. I wanted to watch you break like I did." His words landed like a punch. Madison's heart cracked, but she held his gaze. "And the kiss?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. "Was that part of your revenge too?" Ethan stopped just a few feet from her. He stared at her for what felt like an eternity before he finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "No, that was my mistake. I didn't mean to feel anything for you." A wave of emotion crashed over her. Anger, grief, but also painful understanding. "You say I'm the daughter of a traitor," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm not my father, Ethan. I didn't know what he did to you, and I'm not here to pay for his sins." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, dry, almost hollow. "You think that's enough? That you can walk into my life, stir up everything, and just leave like nothing happened? You don't understand, Madison. This house, this life, it's all that was left after your father ruined me." Madison stepped toward him, despite the fear pulsing in her chest. "Then tell me," she said, her voice steady. "Tell me what happened. If you want me to understand, if you want me to leave, then give me the truth." Ethan's eyes flickered between anger and something far deeper, pain. Finally, he turned away and leaned against the bookshelf. 10 years ago," he began, his voice low, "I was a young, ambitious investor. Your father and I partnered on a financial project. I trusted him, put everything I had into it. But he rigged the numbers, shifted the blame when it failed. He walked away with everything. My money, my reputation, my future." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "And Elena? She couldn't take the pressure. She disappeared. I never found out if she was alive or dead." Madison stood frozen. She had always known her father was ruthless in business, but never imagined he had destroyed someone like this. I didn't know," she whispered, tears brimming. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but you can't keep blaming me. I'm not him." Ethan turned back, his eyes burning. "You think I don't know that," he rasped. "But every time I look at you, I see him. And I hate myself because even knowing who you are—" He stopped, his voice cracking. "I still wanted you to stay." Madison's heart thundered. "Still?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, torn. "Still wanted you here," he said so softly she had to strain to hear. "But I can't forgive what your family took from me." Madison felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Then let me help you get it back," she whispered. "I have access to my father's files, his accounts. If he stole from you, there has to be proof." Ethan's eyes widened, hope flickering before doubt crushed it. "Why would you betray your own father?" "Because he's not the man I thought he was," Madison said firmly. "And because you're not the enemy I was raised to avoid. You're just a man who's been hurt too deeply." 2 days later, Madison sat in front of her laptop in Ethan's study, fingers flying across the keyboard. She had called in favors, accessed her father's private servers, and dug through years of financial records. "Here," she said, pointing to the screen as Ethan leaned over her shoulder. His closeness made her pulse race, but she focused on the documents. Transaction records from 10 years ago. Your investment, the falsified reports, everything. Ethan's breathing grew heavy as he read. This is it, he whispered. This proves he embezzled from the partnership. Madison turned to face him. It's enough to destroy him legally and financially. You could get everything back. Your money, your reputation, your life. Their eyes met, and she saw something shift in his expression. And you'd really do this? Ruin your own father? He ruined himself the day he chose greed over honor, Madison said. But Ethan, I need to know something. When this is over, when you have your justice, what happens to us? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can separate you from him, he admitted. This anger, this need for revenge. It's been my only companion for so long. Madison stood, placing her hand on his cheek. Then choose something else. Choose to heal instead of hurt. Choose to love instead of hate. The confrontation with William Pierce happened 3 weeks later in his Chicago office. Madison sat beside Ethan as they presented the evidence to her father and his lawyers. You have 2 choices, Ethan said, his voice steady but cold. Return what you stole willingly, or face criminal charges and public disgrace. William Pierce's face was stone, but Madison saw the defeat in his eyes. How much? He asked. Everything, with interest. $5 million. The room was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Finally, William nodded. You'll have it within the week. He looked at Madison, his expression a mixture of disappointment and grudging respect. I suppose you think you've won. No, Dad, Madison said quietly. I think I've finally learned the difference between loyalty and blind obedience. Spring arrived early that year. Madison stood in the mansion's garden, now alive with budding flowers and the sound of Ethan playing piano through the open windows. He had started playing again after Elena's belongings were finally laid to rest. Her sheet music donated to a local conservatory, her memory honored but no longer a prison. The insurance settlement from her father had restored Ethan's fortune, but more importantly, it had restored his faith in justice. The mansion was being renovated, dark curtains replaced with light, closed rooms opened to sunshine. Madison, Ethan called from the doorway. She turned to see him approaching, a small velvet box in his hands. I know we've only known each other for 3 months, he said, his voice nervous in a way she'd never heard before. And I know we both have scars that are still healing. But you taught me that the heart can choose love over revenge, hope over bitterness. He dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. Madison Pierce, will you marry me? Not because it's expected or arranged, but because I can't imagine my life without your strength, your courage, your music. Madison's heart soared as she looked down at this man who had started as her shelter in a storm, and had become her reason to believe in love again. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she thought of her mother's words. Freedom costs more than diamonds, Madison. But you have to be brave enough to pay the price. She had paid that price, her family's approval, her inheritance, her old life. But in return, she had gained something far more valuable. A love built on truth, respect, and the shared courage to choose their own destiny. 1 year later, Madison Cross stood at the piano in what was now their music room, playing for the small gathering of friends who had come to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. Ethan sat nearby, his eyes never leaving her face, still amazed that the storm that had brought her to his door had been the beginning of their greatest adventure. Her father had sent a card, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. You chose your path, Madison. I hope it leads to happiness. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. As the evening wound down and their guests departed, Ethan pulled Madison close. Any regrets? He asked, his voice warm against her ear. Madison looked around their home, bright now with love and laughter, filled with music and hope. Then she looked into the eyes of the man who had taught her that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the courage to run toward the unknown. Only one, she said with a smile, that it took a storm to bring us together. Ethan laughed, the sound rich and free. Then here's to storms, he said, spinning her around the room as music filled the air. And to the courage to dance in them. Outside, spring rain began to fall, but inside, their hearts had found their forever home.